So in this first module, we're going to explore what is the difference between a polarity and a duality, and how can you really recognize this and work with these different energies and these different elements at play in your day-to-day life, as well within yourself, as within your business or team or with your partner. So let's explore what is the difference between a duality and between a polarity. Now, the first question we need to ask ourselves here is, what is a duality? What is that? We talk about unity, we talk about duality, but what is duality actually? And if we just look at the word duality, that word consists of dual anality. So dual, what is dual? Very simply put, what it means is two. Two. Dual. Yeah. Now, the world that we live in, the universe, the world that we live in, is made of dualities. Inner, outer, left, right, up, down, night, day, inhale, exhale. Yeah, so the world is made of dualities, and but it's our mind that is made of dualities as well. Our mind creates a dualistic perspective of the world. So if I look at a tree, for example, I can say this is the right side of the tree. But I can only reference the right side of a tree, if I have the understanding and the perspective there's a left side of the tree as well. I can't speak of a right side if I also don't have in mind a concept of what it is to have a left side. So this is a duality. Now, what is the difference between a duality and a polarity? Is that a polarity is not only a duality, but it's a duality and an energetic that's in conflict with one another. So generally speaking, when I reference the right side of the tree, I don't necessarily prefer the right side of the tree over the left side of the tree. Yeah, a polarity happens when we prefer one side over the other. For example, I prefer daylight over night. Or I prefer to take care of myself as opposed to take care of others. Or I prefer the masculine energy inside of me instead of the feminine energy inside of me. And we will go into as to what that exactly means and how you can integrate these energies. But a polarity is only at play if we have a preference for one side over the other. So not every duality is a polarity. However, every polarity is a duality. Now, the question is here then, how do you recognize that you are operating on a polarity? Whether that is within yourself or with someone else, a group of people, the government or an organization or a system. How do you recognize you're operating on a polarity? A very, very simple way that you can recognize this is because you're opinionated. So how do you recognize polarities? Because you have a either like or dislike, a preference, like I was referencing before. So you either like something or someone or an organization or way of doing things or way of being in the world. You really like that, you have a preference for that, or you have a strong dislike for that. So you take a stand or a stance. You are either for something or against something. Now you know that you're in a polarity. You're operating in a polarity. Now, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But the moment we get in conflict with either ourselves or other people is if we can't step out of that. And this is where the second point comes in, is that polarities are always value-driven by meaning making in mind. The more something is valued, the deeper the investment of you in that particular perspective or that particular way of being. So because if we can't step outside of our values, particularly the one that we hold as incredibly important, we are head. by polarities and in a sense by our own mind and by our own meaning making of mind and what we think we like or don't like. We know this because we can sit 10 different people in front of the same situation, then there will be 10 very different responses to that situation. So we're all creating our own world. And so the important part to remember is that because a polarity is always value driven, it's okay to have values. Let's say there's a value in your location running of it's important to be honest. That's a value of yours. It's important. I value honesty. Now that's okay. And that's also okay to operate by that. But what happens if someone is, in your opinion, dishonest? Not being truthful? You are going to feel a trigger, what we call a trigger, an energy in motion in the body in response to that. Because your perspective is being challenged. So the more you are invested, so the deeper the investment in that perspective, in that value, the more you're going to be challenged. And as a leader, it is very important to be able to be fluid and flexible within our opinions, within our perspectives, within our values. We can still discern, we can still see what would be more appropriate in particular contexts and situations. But the moment we are stuck in a perspective, we're not leading anymore. We're being had by our own preferences without even knowing it. So this is the power of this work, to really start to see these polarities, these dynamics within ourselves, so that we can actually free ourselves from these dynamics within ourselves, so that we can show up in the world, within our teams, within our organizations, within our family system, with our partners, in more flexible and fluid ways. And we're not reacting to react based upon the past, but we're actually responding to the context, to the situation. We're going to point 3. The mind is a dualistic system. So like I said before, dualities live in mind about reality. Day and night. Left and right. Where does the day start and the night finish? What is the exact moment? And don't give me a 6 a.m. because that's a construct that we created as humans. If we take away time and then the concept of time in that sense, where does it start and where does it finish? You see, it doesn't actually exist. It only exists in our own mind, the perception of reality. So the mind is a dualistic system, and it is an attentional system. It focuses, and there's an attention on something and something's not. So we leave out a whole bunch of information to focus and have our attention focused on particular areas. And so it sits in the word attentional system. It's a tension. So the way you can recognize also polarities within yourselves is because there's a tension arising, a tension in the system, a contraction of some sort. There's some sort of tension arising. And then the fourth point, so coming back to point 1, is that you then take a stance or a stand. So you become opinionated because there's a tension arising. And often it's some form of self-defense. So this is particularly valuable in team dynamics and in business and in any form of leadership, but also in family dynamics. Is if you notice someone is getting defensive, they're protecting a perspective. They're protecting this opinion that they hold quite dearly, probably. And to lead is to healthily challenge that. And to lead is to first and foremost recognize this within yourself, that this is constantly at play. And to lead is therefore to not take a reference point, but being able to come in and out of these dynamics energetically, to stand in it, but also stand outside of it. So polarities always need a reference point. They need an opposition in order to exist. In order for me to reference myself, I need to have the reference point of others around me. In order for me to reference masculine energy, I need to have a reference point of what it is to have the what seems to be the opposite, which is not actually the opposite, but it is a feminine energy. And what we'll be exploring in this course is that they're not actually oppositions. They just seem to be oppositions. And the moment they seem to be oppositions, you're operating on a polarity and you're kind of stuck, actually. There's a stuckness in that. A stuckness in a polarity. And all that we really want to focus on in the beginning here is awareness. So awareness is the first step to really start seeing these attentional systems, these attentional filters, these value-driven filters in meaning making of mind, as well as the whole body gets engaged. So that we can be more fluid and flexible in the world. And a really good example of this is, let's say a colleague comes to you and says, hey, I really don't like what you're doing, or I don't like what you're saying. Can you watch the energy in the body in response to that? Wanting to go in defense mode, wanting to go and protect yourself. Whilst actually there's a great learning in what that person is bringing. It's like, okay, if you're able to stand out of it, just like, okay, what specifically do you mean? What can I learn here becomes the attitude, as opposed to how can I defend my perspective? And now you're leading, now you're in leadership. You're leading yourself, potentially leading the other. So now you're evolving. Now you're in flow and collaboration, which is really possible and available for all of us. So we've spoken in some other videos already about what is the ego/self structure. And here there's some ways that we've defined it, because for polarities to exist, we need to have an ego structure, an ego, a sense of self that is invested into a opinion, a perspective, a value. So what is this ego structure? Because it's only ever the ego structure that can operate on a polarity. It's not actually you that operates on a polarity. It's a part of the mind that gets stuck in these perspectives. So what is the ego and the self structure? How can you recognize this? Yeah. So the ego, the self structure, is a genuine sense of being someone that is separate. It's not only a concept of I am someone, I am John, for example, the vice president of whatever big organization. No, it's a genuine, even when you walk on the beach and you're completely by yourself, there's no one around, it's a genuine sense of being someone that is separate from the rest of the environment to the rest of the world. The ego structure is invested in knowledge, including spiritual knowledge. So it knows the answer. The moment you know, you don't know. And this is going to be particularly valuable with polarity integration, because the moment you know your perspective, you're immediately blind to the other side of it. So there's lots of dimensions and layers to explore here, which is really exciting. And then there are the core human drivers. This is from Joseph Scott from the coaching room. They are driven on polarities, and they're also the investment of the ego and the self structure, which is pain and pleasure. Have you noticed that a part of you is constantly busy moving away from pain and towards pleasure in some way, shape, or form? Now, that is a polarity in and of itself, to move away from pain and move towards pleasure. So that's a very powerful polarity to explore. And it's one of the core drivers of human existence, of how this ego structure keeps itself alive, if you will. The second one is attunement, so knowing what you are, but not having it recognized. This has to do with being seen. Being seen as someone important, being seen as someone valuable, being seen and being recognized and being acknowledged as someone. Doesn't matter what it is specifically, it's just as someone in the world. And because you're busy being seen in a particular way, you aren't actually allowing others to really truly see you, which is a great loss, both for yourself and for them, because that's where genuine connection happens. And genuine beingness, if you will. The third piece is a lack of basic trust in the moment. Have you noticed that most people, particularly when they do a presentation or they have something to present, maybe at work or in other contexts or in other areas of life, they don't actually trust that the environment is holding them? Maybe you've noticed this within yourself. You don't actually trust anyone or anything, and you don't actually entrust the environment that you're in. And so there's this sense that you constantly need to move towards something or away from something, which keeps this ego structure alive. But what is available for all of us is to really surrender. It's a surrendering quality, to really return back to this basic trust that you can simply show up in life, in any given context, in any given situation, with this sense of trust beyond trust, really, that you are safe. And then the fourth piece is the sense of being separate. And this is where then the need for belonging and community and connection comes in. So the sense of being separate from other people, from the world. So now the need for belonging comes in, need to belong to something. So those are 4 very important core human drives that keeps the ego structure alive. And these are very, very valuable processes to work with. And then other ways that the ego structure, that we can recognize it both within ourselves, but also in other people, but first and foremost within ourselves, is judgment, either of ourselves, other people, situations or context or environment or structures in the world, systems at play, whatever it might be. Clinging, so holding on to things, or avoidance, pushing it away or not even looking at it. Yeah, so this is how you can recognize these dimensions, both within yourself and in other people. And these will be the polarities that we will be exploring more as you understand and start to recognize that there's this ego structure in you that's potentially running the show. And to lead is to go within that, but also beyond that. So that you can be fluid and flexible in the world, and so that you can actually meet the situation at hand as it is, and not with some preconceived memory in your mind and then respond to your memory. Most people respond to their memory. They don't actually respond to the moment, they respond to their memory of the moment. So can you meet the moment as it is? Which in a certain sense means living without a past and without a future. And you're simply here, responding, moving with, flowing. Doesn't mean you can't have goals for the future, etc., financial goals, business goals. Doesn't mean that. But on a day-to-day level, on a moment-to-moment basis, you're here responding to what's here. Now you're in flow, and now you're in creativity with reality, which is where true leadership actually sits. And I'm super excited to explore more dualities and polarities and oppositions with you, and see how these dynamics play themselves out both within yourself and other people, so that you can return to this natural way of being within yourself.